Never believed in timing. I thought things just happened and we dealt with them, good or bad. But the day I met Kian changed that. It wasn't love at first sight, it wasn't some fairy tale encounter. It was blood on pavement, a blinding headache, and a voice telling me to keep my eyes open. His voice. Calm, commanding, and terrified all at once. I didn't know him, but something in the way he held my hand, the way he refused to let go, made me think, maybe timing was real after all. I was 16, just another high schooler walking home, headphones on, mind wandering. I didn't see the car until it hit me. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, people shouting, someone calling an ambulance. But it was Kian who got to me first. He was a medical student just passing by, still in his hospital scrubs, fresh out of a long shift. He knelt beside me like it was instinct. I found out later he was only 19. Barely older than me, but that day, he was everything I needed. I didn't remember his name. Not at first. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and the pain medication made everything around me soft and distant, like I was underwater. But when I woke up that second morning, the room had a new presence. He was standing there, quietly, holding a plastic bag of grapes like he wasn't sure if he should even be in the room. He had that cautious look people get when they care a little too much, but don't know if they're allowed to. I blinked a few times before I could fully focus on his face. It was familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Then it hit me, not in words, but in a feeling. He had been there. Not just there, but the first voice I heard when everything else had gone black. He didn't say much. Just stood there for a moment, shifting from foot to foot like he was late for something but didn't want to leave. You're awake, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly like he wasn't used to being this relieved. It was strange, because it didn't feel like we were strangers anymore. Not after what happened. He walked over slowly and placed the bag of grapes on the tray beside my bed. Then he just kind of stood there, like he was waiting for me to say something. I managed a small smile, and I remember he looked like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He introduced himself properly that day. His name was Kian. 19. Second-year med student. And even though I was groggy and barely functioning, I was aware of how nervous he seemed. I asked him, "Why'd you come?" He laughed, not like it was funny, but more like he was embarrassed. "I don't know. I couldn't stop thinking about whether you were okay. It wasn't romantic, not in the way movies make it seem. It was real. Messy. A little awkward. But I liked that. I liked how uncertain he was, how he didn't pretend to be smooth or charming. He cared, and it showed in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at my foredrip every few minutes like he was silently checking if I was stable. We didn't talk long that day. The nurse came in and told him visiting hours were over. He gave me a small wave, then hesitated at the door. "I'll come by tomorrow. If that's okay." I nodded. It was more than okay. I didn't know what he meant to me yet, or what any of this meant, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just someone who happened to be there that day. He was going to matter. The next day, he showed up again. This time with a small paperback book and a ridiculous bottle of orange juice that had a cartoon face on it. He didn't try to explain either. Just placed them beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mom was in the room when he walked in. She eyed him carefully, the way mothers do. Protective. Calculating. Kian noticed but didn't say anything. Instead, he greeted her respectfully, then turned to me like we'd known each other for much longer than 48 hours. He asked about my pain levels, if I was eating, if the dizziness had gone down. I could tell he wasn't just making conversation. He was genuinely interested in the answer. And when I told him the pain meds were making me a little sick to my stomach, he frowned like it was his personal problem to solve. Later, after my mom stepped out to talk to a nurse, I asked him again why he kept coming. He leaned back in the chair beside my bed, staring at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "I guess I feel like I need to. Like I started something that day and now I have to see it through." I didn't say anything for a while. I just watched him. He didn't seem like someone who was used to opening up. But he stayed anyway. And slowly, a rhythm started to form. Every day he came with something small, fruit, a crossword, sometimes just a story from his classes. He made me laugh, which was something I hadn't done in days. We didn't flirt. It wasn't like that. At least not yet. It was more like building trust, space, time. He told me about his childhood in passing, mentioned how his dad got sick when he was 10, and how that changed everything. He didn't go into detail, and I didn't push. But I saw the weight in his eyes, the kind people carry when they've had to grow up too soon. When I thanked him once for being there, he just shrugged. I wasn't the only one who could have stopped. But I did. And now I'm here. That has to mean something, right? It did. It meant more than he knew. The nurses started noticing him too. One asked if he was my brother, and I said no, a little too quickly. She smiled like she knew something I didn't. It was strange how fast someone could go from being a stranger to someone you looked forward to seeing. In a world that suddenly felt out of control, Kian became something solid. Something I could depend on, and maybe I wasn't ready to call it love. Maybe I didn't even understand what love was at that age. But I knew this. I wanted him to keep coming back. I wanted to know why he carried so much weight in his voice, why he kept looking at me like he owed me something, when all I could feel was that I owed him everything. The day I was discharged, the hospital felt louder than usual. Not because of any real noise, but because of what was missing. I kept looking toward the entrance every few minutes, expecting him to appear. Kian had been there almost every day, and somehow, I had grown used to his quiet presence. I guess I assumed he'd be there for the send-off too, but he wasn't. Instead, a nurse handed me a small note folded in half. It was in Kian's handwriting, rushed and uneven. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there today. Had an exam I couldn't miss. But I'm proud of you for getting through this. Heal strong. You've got more strength than you know. I'll check in soon. No's signature. No extra details. It wasn't dramatic or romantic. Just real. I clutched the note in my hand all the way home, pressing the crease into my palm. I told myself it was fine, that he didn't owe me anything, that we were just two people connected by an accident and a moment of kindness. But the truth was harder to admit. I missed him. Even before I got home, I missed him. My room looked different after 2 weeks in the hospital. It was still the same posters on the wall, same books stacked messily on the desk, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Something had shifted. I had changed, and I didn't know how to fit back into the life I had left behind. The messages from school friends had slowed down. Some had visited once or twice, but most had moved on. I didn't blame them. That's how life works. People get busy. But it only made the silence feel heavier. For the next few days I waited. Not for a miracle. Just for a message. A short text, anything. But my phone stayed still. Kian didn't reach out. By the third day, I started to convince myself that maybe I had imagined our connection. That maybe he had just been kind out of duty, and once I was safe, his role was over. But on the fourth night, just before I went to bed, my phone buzzed. I hope you're healing okay. Just that. No greeting, no emojis. Nothing extra. But I read it over and over again like it was some kind of poem. I typed out a reply 3 different times before finally settling on something simple. Getting better. Thanks for checking. He didn't respond right away, and that was okay. Because just knowing he hadn't forgotten about me, that I hadn't been just another patient, was enough to help me sleep. And in that quiet space between uncertainty and something more, I realized how strange it was to miss someone who had never really been yours. But I did. I missed him in a way that felt unfair. And yet, I wouldn't have traded that feeling for anything. The weeks that followed were quiet in a new way. My body was healing faster than I expected, but my mind hadn't caught up. I wasn't sure how to be around people again. Everything felt a little off, like the world had kept spinning while I had been stuck in a hospital bed watching ceiling tiles. Kian didn't visit again after I got home, not right away. But every few days I'd get a message from him. Always short, Always thoughtful. How's the walking coming along? Did you start reading that book I left? Don't push yourself too hard. Rest is recovery too. There was never anything flirty or suggestive. It was all careful, gentle. But beneath every message, I felt the same question I was too afraid to ask. Why are you still here? One Saturday afternoon, I finally replied with something bolder. You don't have to keep checking in. I'm good. He didn't respond until that night. I know I don't have to. But I want to. That line stayed with me for days. When we finally agreed to meet, it was at a cafe halfway between my house and his campus. I was nervous, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I did, more than I was ready to admit. He was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, reading a textbook, highlighter in hand. He looked up and smiled as I approached. That same warm, slightly uncertain smile I remembered from the hospital. We talked for an hour. About everything and nothing. He told me about the pressure of med school, how hard it was to keep up with everyone who seemed to have their lives figured out. I told him about how weird school had been since the accident, how people treated me like I was either fragile or invisible. He listened. Not just heard, but actually listened. And I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone else. Not even my closest friends. He never made me feel like I was being dramatic or overthinking. He just nodded and asked questions like my feelings deserved space. When I asked him again, gently this time, why he kept coming back, he paused. Then he said something I still think about. Because I don't want this to be just a moment. I don't want you to be just a memory. I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just smiled and let the silence do the talking. That night, I realized something important. Sometimes, people come into your life not to change everything, but to make you feel like you're not alone while you change yourself. And even if I couldn't name what we were yet, friends, something more, something in between, I knew this much: I wanted to keep finding out. After that day at the cafe, something subtle shifted between us. We didn't talk about it, we didn't define it, but we both knew. The air felt different. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. We still texted, though not every day, and when we met up, it wasn't planned too far ahead. Just a hey, free for coffee or want to take a walk. That's how it was, simple. Except, it wasn't, because each time we sat across from each other, every minute felt charged with something unsaid. I started to notice the way Kian's eyes lingered on mine a little too long when I laughed. I noticed how he reached for the bill without hesitation, even when I told him not to. And I noticed how he'd asked me about school and listened so intently, even if I was just ranting about some boring group project, or how I hated chemistry. But I also started noticing something else. The walls he kept up. He talked easily about medicine, about professors, about textbooks and schedules. But when I asked about his past, his family, where he grew up, what made him tick, he became quiet. Not cold, just careful. He'd answer enough to satisfy the question, but not enough to be vulnerable. One evening, I told him about a dream I'd been having. It was just a simple one, me standing in the middle of a crosswalk, unable to move, with headlights growing closer. I laughed nervously after I shared it, expecting him to brush it off, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "That's your body remembering. Trauma doesn't always leave visible bruises." Then he looked down at his coffee and stirred it for a long time. Do you have any dreams like that? I asked. He nodded. Yeah. But mine started a long time ago, that was it. No explanation. No details. Just that sentence. And for the first time, I realized Kian carried more than he let on. Later that night, I got a message from him. "Thanks for not pushing me too hard today." I replied, "Thanks for letting me in. Even a little." I didn't know where we were headed. I didn't know what I wanted from him, or if I was even ready to want something. But I knew I wasn't imagining this. There was something real here. Maybe fragile, maybe not fully formed, but real. And for someone who had spent weeks feeling like a stranger in their own life, that mattered more than I could put into words. About a month after the accident, I had my final checkup. The doctor said my recovery was better than expected, that I could start easing back into my normal routine. But nothing felt normal anymore. The hardest part wasn't the limp that still showed up when I was tired, or the scar on my shoulder that peeked out from tank tops. It was the way people looked at me, like I was a reminder of how quickly life could change. At school, I caught stares I didn't know how to respond to. Teachers gave me soft smiles, and classmates gave me space, but not the good kind. It felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, like I was a symbol instead of a person. I told Kian all of this one night over the phone. He didn't interrupt. Just listened, the way he always did. Then he said something I still think about. You're not just what happened to you. And anyone who only sees that doesn't deserve to see the rest. It hit me so hard I had to sit down. He had a way of saying things that weren't meant to sound deep, but always were. I asked him if he ever felt like that, invisible in plain sight. All the time, he replied. Especially in med school. You're surrounded by people trying to impress each other, and sometimes you forget you're allowed to just feel things. We sat in silence for a bit after that. Not awkward. Just still. Then, for the first time, he told me something real. And why Dad had a stroke when I was 10. He survived, but he was never the same. My mom took care of him, and I took care of her. That's why I became interested in medicine. But also why I didn't have time for much else. It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared. I didn't say anything right away. I just listened, then I said, "I'm glad you told me." He laughed softly. I don't tell many people. Well, I'm not many people. I hadn't meant it to sound flirtatious. But it hung in the air between us, soft and strange and maybe true. We didn't label it. Whatever it was. We just kept showing up. For coffee, for walks, for the occasional late-night text about life or stress or nothing at all. But with every moment, I started to realize, I didn't just like him because he saved me. I liked him because he saw me. And slowly, I started seeing him too. Not just as the young doctor who pulled me off the road, but as a person. With fears. With history. With hope. And maybe, just maybe, with room for something like love. It was raining the day I saw Kian again after a 2-week stretch of silence. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument or distance, but the kind that creeps in when life gets too busy, and both sides are too hesitant to reach out first. I had been thinking about texting him for days. I wrote messages and deleted them. I told myself if he wanted to talk, he would. But every morning I woke up, checked my phone, and felt the weight of nothing, until that Friday. I was sitting by the window at the local library, pretending to study but really just watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass, when someone sat across from me. I didn't need to look up. I knew he just said hey, like it hadn't been 2 weeks. Like we hadn't let the silence build between us. I looked at him, heart thudding, unsure whether to be angry, relieved, or just honest. "Thought you forgot about me," I said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't," he replied quickly. "Just got overwhelmed. Midterms, labs, life," and I understood. Because life doesn't wait for feelings. It just keeps going. We sat there quietly for a while, the hum of the library softening the tension. He pulled out his notebook, I opened mine, but neither of us really worked. Then he said, without looking up, "You know, I missed this." It caught me off guard, not just the words, but the way he said us, like it was something real. Like we had become something worth naming. I didn't say anything right away. I just reached over and gently touched his hand where it rested on the table. Not a bold move, just a reminder. "I'm here too." He looked up, smiled, and for the first time, I saw how tired he looked. Not just physically, but emotionally. Like he was carrying a backpack full of things he never talked about. We didn't define anything that day. There were no confessions, no dramatic moments. But we both knew that something had shifted again. He walked me home that evening. We didn't use umbrellas. We let the rain soak our sleeves and drip from our hair. We talked about everything except what was most obvious. And maybe that was okay. Because sometimes, the most important things don't need to be said all at once. Sometimes they grow quietly, like roots under the surface, until one day they're strong enough to carry the weight of everything. We were both at a fundraiser hosted by the university's medical society. He had invited me weeks ago, and I wasn't sure if it was a real invitation or something polite he forgot to cancel. But I went. The hall was full of people in semi-formal clothes, buzzing with conversations about research, internships, and residencies. I felt out of place, like I'd wandered into a movie I didn't audition for. Kian spotted me by the doorway and immediately excused himself from the group he was standing with. "I'm so glad you came," he said, and for the first time in a while, I believed him completely. But as the evening went on, I saw the way people looked at him. Not just as a peer, but as someone they admired. Someone calm under pressure, someone kind without ego. They didn't know the boy who sat with me for hours in silence, who checked in without asking for anything in return. They only knew the version of him that functioned under fluorescent lights and hospital schedules. Later, as we stood near the refreshment table, I asked him, "Do you ever feel like you have to be different versions of yourself for different people?" He looked at me, thoughtful. "All the time." I nodded. "So which one is real?" He didn't hesitate. "This one. With you." That stopped me. I felt something shift in my chest, something I wasn't sure I was ready to name. On the way out, he walked me to the curb. It was late, and most of the guests had left. "The streets were quiet." "I'm proud of you," I said suddenly. "For everything. For who you are." He smiled, then looked away. "I'm just trying to keep up." "You're doing more than that," I replied. "You're showing up. That's enough." We didn't hug. We didn't hold hands. That night, I realized love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes it's in the quiet presence. In the way someone makes you feel seen. In the simple act of standing beside you, even when the world feels too big. And somewhere between raindrops and silence, I was starting to fall for him. Not because he saved my life, but because he reminded me I had one to keep living. By the time spring arrived, everything felt different. The world looked alive again. Trees bloomed. Cafes pulled their chairs outside. I started walking without thinking about each step. And without realizing it, Kian had become part of my rhythm. We weren't dating, not officially. But he was the first person I texted when something good happened, and the only one I wanted to talk to when things felt heavy. He never pressured me. He never asked for anything in return. But he was there. Always. That was the month my parents started noticing. "You've been out a lot lately," my mom said one evening. Not suspicious, just observant. I shrugged, trying not to smile. "Just walking." "Clears my head." She looked at me the way mothers do when they already know the answer. "It's that boy, isn't it?" I didn't deny it. I just nodded. "He seems kind," she added softly. "But be careful." I wasn't sure what she meant by that. Careful with him, or careful with my heart? Maybe both. Around that time, Kian invited me to a small dinner at his apartment. Nothing fancy. Just him, his roommate, and a couple of med school friends. He cooked spaghetti and bought cheap garlic bread from the supermarket. We laughed. We talked. We played old songs and argued about which one was best. And somewhere in the middle of the evening, I caught myself looking at him, really looking, and feeling something I hadn't felt since before the accident. Peace. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. Just the quiet, steady kind of calm that makes you want to stay. Later, when everyone left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, we sat on the floor with mugs of tea, legs stretched out, shoulders almost touching. "I don't know what this is," I said, without looking at him. "Us." "I don't know what you want." He didn't rush to answer. Then he said, "I don't want to rush you. I don't want to label it if you're not ready. But I know I feel better when you're around. And I know that matters." It was the most honest thing either of us had said. I nodded. "It matters to me too." We didn't kiss. Not that night. But the space between us felt full. With hope. With the beginnings of something real. And for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of where this might go. But life, as always, doesn't wait for emotions to catch up. Just a week after that dinner, I got the news I hadn't expected. My mom had been offered a new job in another city. Bigger salary. Better opportunities. A chance to reset. And the catch, we'd have to move in less than 2 months. I didn't say anything to Kian at first. I didn't know how. I didn't even know how I felt about it myself. There was a part of me that welcomed the change, a new place, a fresh start. But there was also a part that felt like it was being torn away from something just beginning. A few days later, we sat in our usual spot in the park, the one near the rusted fountain that never worked but always sounded peaceful when the wind rustled the leaves. I finally told him. He didn't flinch. Didn't get dramatic. Just nodded slowly and said, "Okay." I waited for more. For a reaction. For anything. "That's it?" I asked. He looked at me, and his eyes were softer than I expected. "I'm not going to beg you to stay. That wouldn't be fair. But I'm also not going to pretend this doesn't matter to me." I felt the tears press behind my eyes. "I don't want to leave. But I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he replied. "But sometimes the right one hurts the most." We didn't talk much after that. We just sat in silence. It wasn't awkward, it was grief. The kind that comes before the loss even happens. That night, he sent me a voice message. Not a text. Just his voice. "I don't know how to say goodbye to you," he said. "So maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just say thank you. For the moments. For the kindness. For changing the way I think about life." I listened to it 3 times before I cried. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was real. Because it was goodbye without saying goodbye. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Not completely. Some people come into your life quietly, change everything, and leave a space you can't refill. And sometimes they come back. The last month in the city felt unreal. Everything I did seemed like a last walk past the bookstore where I used to kill time. Last coffee from the place that always got my name wrong. Last bus ride home, head leaning against the cold window, pretending I didn't feel anything. And Kian, he was still there, but we both started pulling back. Not because we wanted to, but because neither of us knew how to hold on to something that was about to end. We stopped meeting every few days. Our texts slowed. Not cold, not distant, just careful. Like we were both protecting ourselves from feeling the full weight of goodbye too early. Then, one Friday afternoon, just a week before the move, I got a text from him. "Meet me." Our spot. I knew where he meant. The park. The bench near the broken fountain. When I got there, he was already waiting, headphones in, staring at the sky like it held some answer. He stood when he saw me, not smiling, just watching. "I wrote you something," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Wrote?" He pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. His handwriting was messy, rushed, but real. "It's not a letter," he added quickly. "More like thoughts. Things I don't want to forget." I didn't open it right away. I didn't have the courage. I just held it in my palm, feeling its weight. "You don't have to read it now," he said. "Just promise you won't throw it away." I nodded, afraid my voice would crack if I spoke. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his bag and pulled out a tiny box. Inside was a simple keychain, shaped like a small compass. "It doesn't point north," he said, almost laughing. "It's just for show. But I like the idea of it. That no matter where you end up, you'll always know you had a direction once. And maybe it'll remind you of here." Of this. I took it, turning it over in my hand. It was light, almost silly. But it felt like the most important thing anyone had ever given me. He didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask him to wait. We didn't make promises. But as we stood there, under the gray spring sky, I realized something. Love doesn't always look like forever. Sometimes it's quiet. Temporary. Bittersweet. But no less real. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it matter so much. The day we moved, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad at first. I was too busy packing boxes, loading bags, and saying goodbye to neighbors who barely remembered my name. It wasn't until we passed the city limits sign that the silence hit me. Not the kind that fills a room, but the kind that settles into your chest and stays there. I took out the letter Kian gave me. I hadn't read it yet. I had kept it in the front pocket of my backpack, like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Not even with myself. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases, my heart thudding as I read. "You once asked me what I wanted from this. From you?" I didn't know how to answer then. Maybe because I was scared, but now I do. I wanted time. Just a little more. Time to walk you home. To ask you questions. To sit in silence and feel okay. Time to see what this could be, if life didn't get in the way. But life always gets in the way, doesn't it? So I'll say this instead: thank you for being the first person who made me feel like more than just a future doctor. For seeing the part of me that no one else looked at. And if this is goodbye, then let it be soft. Let it be kind. Let it be the kind of goodbye that doesn't close doors, just leaves one slightly open. I read it 3 times. Each time slower than the last. The words didn't hurt the way I thought they would. They felt like a hand on my shoulder. A whisper of something that was never promised but deeply appreciated. He never said he loved me. I never said it either. But maybe that was okay. Maybe what we had didn't need a name to be real. In a way, the move wasn't an ending. It was a change in direction. He had given me something I didn't know I needed: clarity. And maybe one day, I'd give it back. I slipped the letter back into my backpack, fingers brushing the compass keychain still in the side pocket. Some people come into your life like flash floods. Sudden. Overwhelming. Loud. But others arrive like a heartbeat. Steady. Quiet. Life-giving. And Kian, he was both. It's been almost a year now. A full cycle of seasons. Summer passed quickly. Fall felt heavier than I expected. And winter brought with it a kind of stillness I didn't know how to sit with. Kian and I haven't spoken in months. Not out of anger or bitterness. Just life. His classes got harder. My days got busier. Messages turned into quick replies. Then short silences. Then none. And that's okay. Because some connections aren't meant to be held onto with force. They're meant to be remembered with grace. I still have the compass keychain. It hangs from my bag like a quiet souvenir. People ask about it sometimes. I just smile and say, it was a gift. But what I don't say is what it means. That every time I see it, I'm reminded of the boy who showed up when I was broken. The one who didn't try to fix me, but who stayed while I learned to fix myself. He never tried to impress me with big words or promises. He just listened. Asked questions. Let me speak when I needed to. Stayed quiet when I didn't. He reminded me that love, real love, isn't always fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it's showing up. Sometimes it's carrying someone through the quietest pain. I think about him sometimes. Not every day, but often enough. When I pass by hospitals. When I read something about med students. When I see someone help a stranger with no expectation of being seen. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about me too, but I don't need the answer, because what we had was real in the time it existed. And real things don't vanish. They change shape. They become part of who you are. He was the boy who pulled me from a wreck, but he gave me more than safety. He gave me time. Patience. And a gentle reminder that healing isn't loud. It's slow. It's human. And sometimes, it begins with one person simply deciding to sit beside your brokenness and say, I'm here. That's what Kian did for me. And wherever he is, I hope someone's doing the same for him. Because he deserves it.